Steampunk is a subgenre of science fiction that incorporates retrofuturistic technology and aesthetics inspired by, but not limited to, 19th-century industrial steam-powered machinery. Steampunk works are often set in an alternative history of the Victorian era or the American Wild West, where steam power remains in mainstream use, or in a fantasy world that similarly employs steam power. Steampunk features anachronistic technologies or retrofuturistic inventions as people in the 19th century might have envisioned them, distinguishing it from neo-Victorianism, and is likewise rooted in the era's perspective on fashion, culture, architectural style, and art. Such technologies may include fictional machines like those found in the works of H. G. Wells and Jules Verne. Other examples of steampunk contain alternative history-style presentations of such technology as steam cannons, lighter-than-air airships, analog computers, or such digital mechanical computers as Charles Babbage's analytical engine. Steampunk may also incorporate additional elements from the genres of fantasy, horror, historical fiction, alternate history, or other branches of speculative fiction, making it often a hybrid genre. As a form of speculative fiction, it explores alternative futures or pasts but can also address real-world social issues. The first known appearance of the term steampunk was in 1987, though it now retroactively refers to many works of fiction created as far back as the 1950s or earlier. A popular subgenre is Japanese steampunk, consisting of steampunk-themed manga and anime, with steampunk elements having appeared in mainstream manga since the 1940s. Steampunk also refers to any of the artistic styles, clothing fashions, or subcultures that have developed from the aesthetics of steampunk fiction, Victorian-era fiction, Art Nouveau design, and films from the mid-20th century. Various modern utilitarian objects have been modded by individual artisans into a pseudo-Victorian mechanical steampunk style, and a number of visual and musical artists have been described as steampunk. Precursors: steampunk is influenced by and often adopts the style of the 19th century scientific romances of Jules Verne, H. G. Wells, Mary Shelley, and Edward S. Ellis's The Steam Man of the Prairies. Several more modern works of art and fiction significant to the development of the genre were produced before the genre had a name. Titus Alone, 1959, by Mervyn Peake, is widely regarded by scholars as the first novel in the genre proper, while others point to Michael Moorcock's 1971 novel The Warlord of the Air, which was heavily influenced by Peake's work. The film Brazil, 1985, was an early cinematic influence, although it can also be considered a precursor to the steampunk offshoot dieselpunk. The Adventures of Luther Arkwright was an early, 1970s, comic version of the Moorcock-style mover between time streams. In fine art, Remedios Varo's paintings combine elements of Victorian dress, fantasy, and techno-fantasy imagery. In television, one of the earliest manifestations of the steampunk ethos in the mainstream media was the CBS television series The Wild Wild West, 1965-69, which inspired the later film. Origin of the term. Although many works now considered seminal to the genre were published in the 1960s and 1970s, the term steampunk originated largely in the 1980s as a tongue-in-cheek variant of cyberpunk. It was coined by science fiction author K.W. Jeter, who was trying to find a general term for works by Tim Powers, The Anubiscates, 1983, James Blaylock, Homunculus, 1986, and himself, Morlock Knight, 1979, and Infernal Devices, 1987, all of which took place in a 19th century, usually Victorian, setting and imitated conventions of such actual Victorian speculative fiction as H. G. Wells' The Time Machine. In a letter to science fiction magazine Locus, printed in the April 1987 issue, Jeter wrote, "Dear Locus, enclosed is a copy of my 1979 novel Morlock Knight. I'd appreciate your being so good as to route it to Farren Miller, as it's a prime piece of evidence in the great debate as to who in the Powers/Blaylock/Jeter fantasy triumvirate was writing in the gonzo historical manner first." Though of course, I did find her review in the March Locus to be quite flattering. Personally, I think Victorian fantasies are going to be the next big thing, as long as we can come up with a fitting collective term for Powers, Blaylock and myself. Something based on the appropriate technology of the era, like steampunks, perhaps, K.W. Jeter. while Jeter's Morlock Knight and Infernal Devices, Powers the Anubis Gates, and Blaylock's Lord Kelvin's Machine were the first novels to which Jeter's neologism would be applied. The three authors gave the term little thought at the time. They were far from the first modern science fiction writers to speculate on the development of steam-based technology or alternative histories. Keith Laumer's Worlds of the Imperium, 1962, and Ronald W. Clark's Queen Victoria's Bomb, 1967, apply modern speculation to past-age technology and society. Michael Moorcock's Warlord of the Air, 1971, is another early example. Harry Harrison's novel A Transatlantic Tunnel, Hurrah! 1973, portrays Britain in an alternative 1973, full of atomic locomotives, coal-powered flying boats, ornate submarines, and Victorian dialogue. The Adventures of Luther Arkwright, mid-1970s, was one of the first steampunk comics. In February 1980, Richard A. Lupoff and Steve Stiles published the first chapter of their 10-part comic strip The Adventures of Professor Thintwhistle and His Incredible Ether Flyer. In 2004, one anonymous author described steampunk as colonizing the past so we can dream the future. The first use of the word steampunk in a title was in Paul Di Filippo's 1995 Steampunk trilogy, consisting of 3 short novels, Victoria, Hottentots, and Walt and Emily, which, respectively, imagine the replacement of Queen Victoria by a human/newt clone, an invasion of Massachusetts by Lovecraftian monsters, and a love affair between Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. Many of the visualizations of steampunk have their origins with, among others, Walt Disney's film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, 1954, including the design of the story's submarine the Nautilus, its interiors, and the crew's underwater gear. And George Pal's film The Time Machine, 1960, especially the design of the time machine itself. Aspects of steampunk design emphasize a balance between form and function. In this it is like the arts and crafts movement. But John Ruskin, William Morris, and the other reformers in the late 19th century rejected machines and industrial production. In contrast, steampunk enthusiasts present a non-Luddite critique of technology. Various modern utilitarian objects have been modified by enthusiasts into a pseudo-Victorian mechanical steampunk style. Examples include computer keyboards and electric guitars. The goal of such redesigns is to employ appropriate materials, such as polished brass, iron, wood, and leather, with design elements and craftsmanship consistent with the Victorian era, rejecting the aesthetic of industrial design.